I never imagined it would happen to us, but it did. It happened in the early 2003 to be exact. I was an ordinary kid living in Los Angeles, enjoying the urban life, hanging out with friends, and occasionally having a few drinks. Sometimes I even tried a few drugs. I'm not going to lie to you. One day my friends told me that there was a party organized by a friend who was part of the Los Angeles Chargers at the time, a well-known NFL team in the city. Although I had never talked to him much, my buddies insisted that I should go, so I decided to sign up. I dressed in the best I had, a blue flowered shirt and ripped jeans, very much in the style of the time, and added my glasses and a beach hat, just to add a special touch to my California look. At 9 p.m., Tom and Mike arrived. Tom was a good-looking guy and always had all the girls after him. I still don't understand why he's friends with us, not that we were losers, but clearly he was at quite an advantage. Mike, on the other hand, was the life of the party and was always on top of what was going on in the city's nightlife scene. I got into Tom's older brother Greg's car. At first, Greg seemed like a pain in the ass, but he was actually cool with those he cared about, especially Tom, although he didn't show it much. As he drove us to the party, he asked how long it would last. Tom, shrugging his shoulders, told him, "I don't know, Greg. It could be all night." He let out a sigh and warned us not to do anything silly and not to try to do anything weird. Tom rolled his eyes and nodded, and the car was silent for the rest of the trip. When we arrived, Greg told us to keep our phones on just in case and not to do anything he wouldn't do, smiling as he drove away. We looked at each other, a little annoyed at such distrust on his part, and walked into the party. The place was full of all kinds of people. Students from different backgrounds, attractive boys and girls, and the class clown who couldn't be missed and as usual was doing his thing. We went to a table, got something to drink, and started to have a good time. After dancing and doing some crazy stuff, I noticed that Tom was nowhere to be seen. I turned to Mike and asked him where Tom was. He pointed me towards a secluded phone booth surrounded by people. After a while, Tom came out of the booth adjusting his clothes, followed by a girl who looked flushed and a little agitated. Another little couple entered the booth just then, so I approached Tom and asked him what was going on. "What's up, buddy? Did you have a good time?" I said. He smiled mischievously and nodded. "You should try it. It's a blind encounter game. You get blindfolded, but if you're lucky, you might end up with a cute girl." I shook my head and went back to the table for another beer, watching the booth. That's when I saw Mike blindfolded, paired with the least graceful girl at the party. I couldn't hold my laughter and started guffawing. Just then, a girl came up to me and asked, "Hey, what's so funny?" I pointed towards Mike, and she responded with an "oh" and chuckled. She then suggested I try it without the blindfold. My face went blank for a few seconds, and I stammered, asking her to repeat what she had said. She smiled mischievously, leaned toward me, and whispered in my ear, "I can be your blind date, but blindfold," as she pointed to the door behind her. For a second, my head went completely blank, but then I nodded and followed her, almost floating on air. I figured I wasn't exactly a beau, so I decided to take the opportunity while I could, since they didn't come along this easily very often. We walked into a room full of hay bales and other things. She motioned me over and sat down next to me, one eyebrow raised. She looked at me and said, "You're a virgin, aren't you? I can tell by the way you behave." I was 18 at the time and in my first year of college, but she was right. I had never been with a girl before. I just had never told anyone and had no idea it was so obvious. The thing is, I nodded, and she reassured me. "Don't worry. Tonight will be the most intense night you've ever experienced." Then all of a sudden, she unzipped my pants and, well, what was supposed to happen happened. After that, I lay down in the hay for a moment, as he had exhausted me. Before he left, he slipped me his number and winked at me. After that, I decided to re-enter the main room of the party. By the time I did, everyone had left except for the group of my friends, Mike, Tom, myself, the host, and a random guy named Jorge. I saw Tom making out with a girl, while Mike lay sprawled on the half-ragged couch. I went to the table to grab another beer, but the host appeared out of nowhere and grabbed my arm, saying, "Bro, do you really want to keep drinking this week?" I was confused and asked him what he had in mind. He then suggested I try some good stuff, and as he spoke, laughing, he sprinkled a white powder in my beer, encouraging me to drink. I thought it was weird, but since my friends were there, I figured nothing bad would happen, so I gulped it all down in one gulp. Suddenly, I felt like I was floating. All my stress melted away and the feeling was amazing. I felt super alive and like I was out of this world. I started moving to the beat of the music. Tom and Mike noticed my energy and joined me in my crazy dance as well. Soon, everyone started doing the same, and at that point, anything crazy seemed cool. We did a bunch of antics that, at that instant, felt like the best idea in the world. But after a while, the host called us over saying, "How about we play a game of men?" Tom, curious, asked what kind of game it was, and the host replied, "I told you, a man's game, a real man's game." He looked around and said, "Russian roulette." I raised an eyebrow and said, "Now isn't that the game where you put a bullet in the gun and then everyone pulls the trigger until the bullet comes out? Isn't that dangerous?" He assured me that the gun was a toy gun loaded with rubber bullets. I was skeptical and hesitant at the time, but the effect of the substance in my system clouded my judgment. At that moment, the host pulled a revolver out of his pocket, held it up and showed it to everyone, then put the bullets in the cylinder, turned it, and then closed it. I was silent, but Mike put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Come on, it's just a rubber bullet." Honestly, the gun looked very real, as did the bullet. But I figured that if it was, the host wouldn't be up for the game, so I sighed and finally agreed to participate in this ridiculous game. The host, smiling, put the gun to his temple and pulled the trigger first in a mocking manner, looking at me with a mixture of defiance and nervousness. Nothing happened. "Lucky me," he exclaimed, laughing as he passed the gun to Jorge, who did the same. Despite an initial moment of trepidation, everyone followed suit. So Tom and Mike pulled the trigger with no problem, and nothing happened either. Then it was my turn. I was shaking with fear, imagining the worst. But despite that, Tom tried to calm me down and steadied my hand as he pulled the trigger. For a second, I felt as if my soul was leaving my body, but then I came back to reality without a scratch. I started laughing without quite understanding why, maybe because of nerves or the drug, who knows. After that, we decided to continue throwing, and we played another 5 rounds without further incident. By then, there were only 5 of us left in the place. When the 6th round came, it was after 3 in the morning and I was already feeling a bit sleepy. I guess the effect of what I had consumed was already wearing off a bit, so I told the host that it would be my last round. My friends, who still seemed to have energy for 3 more parties, started calling me a party pooper, but I paid no attention. Instead, I took the revolver out of the host's hands and told him I would go first and then go to sleep. So I put the barrel to my head and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened, as in all the previous rounds, so I handed the gun back to the host and went to lie down in the room where I had just lost my virginity. I fell asleep almost immediately, but then woke up to the roar of a gunshot, followed by screams and a great commotion. I jumped up from the old piece of furniture I was lying on and headed for the door to go back to where the boys were, but before I could open the handle, I heard 2 more shots, one after the other. Then all was silent, and then, after a pause of several seconds, another shot. There were 4 shots in all. I stood paralyzed with the doorknob in my hand while my mind tried to process what was happening, and my heart was pounding as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. My hands were shaking, and it was several minutes before I mustered the courage to open the door and walk out into the hall. All that time, my mind was whirling around all the possible scenarios that could explain what I had just heard, but none of them were hopeful. With trembling hands, I finally turned the handle and started walking towards the living room with slow steps and my legs shaking. And when I finally got there, my worst fears were confirmed. Lying on the ratty old couch were the bodies of Tom and Mike. Tom had a bullet wound in his right temple and a huge exit hole in his left, while his blood and brains were scattered all over the place. Almost on top of him was Mike, but he had a shot in the middle of his eyes, as did Jorge, who was lying on the floor near them, and in front of them all, still sitting on the couch, was the host, whom I have called him that throughout the story, because I still don't know his name. He was sitting on the couch, with half of his body hanging over to the left side where his head was still dripping blood in a puddle. He had a gunshot wound to the temple, clearly fired at close range just as Tom's had been. His right arm was hanging from the armrest of the seat, and underneath it was the revolver. I remember the scene in great detail, because at that moment I felt like time stood still. It was as if everything was in slow motion, and for a moment I felt my body fade away. But I came to my senses and panic took over. I had to sit in an armchair so I could call the police, and hold the phone very tightly because my hands and legs wouldn't stop shaking, and so did my jaw. When they arrived, I was still sitting in the same place, shaking and in complete shock. That night I was taken to the station to make a statement while the units took care of the bodies. I recounted everything in detail, but with a flat voice and a blank stare. It wasn't until my parents arrived and hugged me that I really realized what had happened and broke down. According to the police reconstruction of events, after evaluating my statement and analyzing the crime scene, the host had probably planned to murder us and kill himself from the beginning, and probably everything else was just to extend the night and in some macabre way, have a little fun before doing it. The host waited for the bullet to go out and the first victim to fall, which in this case was Tom, and then he picked up the gun, loaded it, and gave the rest of them a coup de grace shot before shooting himself. The cops believe that the only reason he didn't shoot me is probably because all the alcohol and drugs he had been on that night made him completely forget that there was anyone else. In short, it was pure luck that I got out of that place alive. However, one thing always bothered me, and that is that he played in every round, so there was always the possibility that the first bullet was for himself. If that had been the case, my friends would still be alive, but sometimes fate, it's a complete bastard. Honestly, I had always had a sort of aversion to social media. To me, it didn't make any sense to be aware of someone else's life or expose your own, so that everyone could see what you do and don't do, as if it really mattered. I didn't understand why people cared so much about others and felt the need to follow every step they took online. If it had been up to me, I would have kept a good distance from any social network. But after I got out of college back in 2019, I realized that this was the only way I could stay in touch with my friends. So after a lot of prodding on their part, I ended up downloading TikTok. This wasn't like those typical social networking sites, but focused on short videos. It was the first thing that caught my attention, and I must admit it turned out to be more entertaining than I thought. Plus, there was something for everyone there. I didn't despise it as much as other apps of this type, so I decided to keep it. Truth be told, I didn't use it much, only once in a while when I was bored or curious about what my friends were doing, since between work and work we couldn't always chat or see each other. One night I was tired from work and was looking for something to disconnect from my exhausting day in customer service, so I decided to open TikTok and watch the latest videos in my feed. Most of them were pure nonsense and had nothing to entertain, so I was about to close it when something caught my attention. It was a video at the bottom of the screen. I couldn't see the whole thing, but something about it looked familiar. I stopped, moved closer to the screen, and started scrolling down until I could see the whole thing. As soon as the image was revealed, I felt my blood run cold. It was no wonder it sounded so familiar. It was my own house, specifically my living room. Why was there a video of my house on TikTok? At first I thought maybe I was getting confused and it looked like something, but when I looked at the pictures on the walls, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was exactly the same, so I clicked on the video to watch it in full. This one was very short, lasting only 20 seconds and showing nothing but the inside of my living room with a little instrumental music playing in the background. It had no text added, no description, no nothing. I could have thought it was just an image, but at the end, the camera shook a little, and I could for an instant detect something strange in the music playing in the background, and when I turned up the volume, I could distinguish the sound of breathing, which also let me know that the music was not superimposed on the video, but was actually playing when the person was recording. The account of the person who had uploaded the video was called Invasor Anonymous 101 and only had that video in his profile. Their bio was empty and they had no profile picture. Everything about that account was a mystery, except for that video taken from inside my own home. It didn't make any sense. My first reaction, of course, was to think it was a prank, a very tasteless one, of course. One of my abnormal friends could easily have recorded that 20-second video while in my house sometime and uploaded it to a new account just to scare me. After calming down a bit and thinking more clearly, I decided to check the comments section of the video. There weren't too many, and most were asking weird questions about what the hell that was. But then I saw a comment from one of my friends that said, "Isn't that Britt's living room?" I immediately responded, "Is that you, Elvira? Or was it Sam?" She didn't answer instantly, so I put the cell phone aside and started thinking, there was no way a stranger could have posted that. I mean, I always took security seriously and never left my house unlocked even when I was in here. The only way someone could have recorded that is if it was really me who let them in. My only visitors were Elvira and Sam, so there was no other option. At least none worth considering. Since my friends didn't reply to my comment, I figured it had definitely been them and left the matter alone. However, a couple of days later, another Invasor Anonymous 101 video popped up in my TikTok feed. This time, what I saw gave me the creeps. The video was longer than the previous one and started from the hallway of my apartment before moving into the living room. I could see the dirty pots and pans in the kitchen, stacked on the edge of the countertop. What struck me most was that in the video, it was clearly nighttime. I could notice the dark sky outside the window and the glow of street lamps from the street. Very rarely did anyone come by at this time. In fact, I couldn't even remember the last time someone had been to my house after the sun went down. So whoever recorded that, it had to be Elvira or Sam. It had to be one of them. There could be no other explanation. The idea that it could be someone else, a stranger, began to swirl around in my head, but I didn't understand why they would post these videos if I wasn't even guaranteed to see them. The first video had come to me purely by chance, like almost all the videos that came to me on TikTok, since I followed almost no one other than Elvira, Sam, and a couple of other friends who like to clown around. I had to clear my doubts, so I decided to call Elvira, yes or no. I was not uncomfortable with the videos on TikTok. I wasn't uncomfortable with the videos themselves. I just wanted to know when the hell she had been in my house long enough to record something at night. Elvira answered on the third ring, sounding tired. "Hey Britt, what's up?" she said. Straight to the point, I asked. "Did you upload those videos to TikTok?" That seemed to shake my friend, and her tone changed as she spoke. "You mean those videos from inside your house?" "Yes," I quickly replied. "You uploaded them, didn't you?" "No, Britt, it wasn't me," he said firmly. "But I saw them, in fact. I commented on one of them." I made a mad dog face at that point. Elvira wasn't a very good liar, and her voice had an air of sincerity about it. So she was probably telling the truth, but that didn't mean she couldn't be covering for someone else, so I asked, "So was it Sam?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I don't think so. Why would she do something like that?" I shook my head, trying to think. Then I realized he couldn't see me. "You know how it is. Maybe he did it just to annoy me," I said. "But he's been so busy, Britt, with his new job, he's barely had time to see me. I doubt he's had a chance to do something like this." I bit my lip, realizing he was right. While it was more likely that Sam was behind this, it didn't fit his personality, but still the question kept hammering in my mind. Who was uploading those videos? "Are you okay, Brittany?" my friend asked, clearly noticing my unease after the silence. I didn't want to scare her, so I avoided sharing what I was really thinking. If none of them were responsible, then it had to be a stranger, someone who had broken into my house and taken a video while I was gone. That thought made me feel a knot in my stomach. "It's okay. I'll figure it out," I said quickly. "Sorry to bother you." Then we talked some more before cutting the call short. I sat for a while staring at the blank screen of my phone before opening the profile of Invasor Anonymous 101. I went to his latest video and left a comment asking who he was and how he had recorded that video, but it was completely ignored. Later that week, another video appeared that was even more disturbing than the previous ones. It was also recorded at night and started the same way, from the entrance of my house, and went through the living room and kitchen. But this time it didn't stop there, but walked down the small hallway to my bedroom. As soon as I saw the gloved hand approaching my bedroom door, I felt the air get stuck in my lungs. At the video, the door opened and a faint beam of moonlight illuminated the figure on the bed, and that figure was me, sound asleep. At that moment, I wanted to throw my cell phone away from me and cover my face from the horror, but I was paralyzed. All I could do was watch as the stranger in the video recorded me in my sleep, and for the seconds it lasted, you could hear my deep breathing mingling with that of the person behind the camera and the faint instrumental music in the background, until finally, the video cut out. I was in shock. I didn't know how to react. Fear was choking me. I had no idea who this guy was or how he had gotten into my house, but I needed answers. "Who the hell are you and why are you doing this?" I commented on the video. It was already late and terror was consuming me. What if the stranger came back? What if he did something even more horrible? I knew I had to call the police, but I wondered what they could do if there was no clue as to the identity of the person behind that account. I clicked on the TikTok video again, and in a mixture of anger and fear, I left another comment, "Just leave me alone." The silence that followed my last comment was deafening. No new video appeared, nor did I receive a response. From then on, every shadow on the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside felt like a threat. The next few days became a cycle of tension and paranoia, until one night a warning jolted me out of a light sleep. It wasn't a new video, but a live feed. Invasir Anonymous 101 was broadcasting from home. My heart was pounding as I clicked on the notification. The static-filled screen showed my darkened living room, and as I made my way to my room, I began to hear footsteps in the hallway. My breathing was now rapid. I realized how vulnerable I was and ran to the door, unlocked it, and lay down with my back to it. Meanwhile, the footsteps kept getting closer until I heard them stop just behind my door. I was in a complete panic at that moment. I couldn't believe that this person was really here. Suddenly, the doorknob started to move, and seeing that the door was secured, he started struggling with the lock to try to open it. At that moment, I began to cry in fear, and it was then that I heard his voice for the first time. "Open the door, Britt. I know you're in there." It was a deep, deep voice that I had never heard before. I felt like my heart would jump out of my chest as he started pounding on the door. I yelled at him to get out of my house and leave me alone, but his response was to laugh as he kept trying to open my bedroom door. But suddenly he stopped struggling with the handle, and I heard him take several steps backwards. At that moment, I felt some relief. I thought maybe he had had enough and would retreat, but instead he kicked the door, breaking the lock and throwing me forward. The impact of the kick on the door was so strong I shot out and almost fell face first to the floor. Then I turned around, and that's when I saw him. He was a very tall man. He had a black hood and gloves. He started walking towards me with his phone in his left hand and a gun in his right hand, pointing it directly at me. I started to cry in terror and beg him not to hurt me, but then a sound flooded the room and made the invader stop in his tracks. It was the police sirens. At that moment, we were both silent for a few seconds until suddenly the invader let out an expletive and ran out the door, but I was too scared and shocked to move, so I just stood there, petrified, in complete shock. Soon I started hearing noises outside. The cops called out several times, and I could hear footsteps running through the yard, until I heard 2 gunshots and then more screams. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway again, but this time not from the invader but from a police officer who came into my room and asked me if I was okay. Unable to utter a word, I just nodded my head and started walking out with him, and as I walked out the front door, I could see Elvira's car pull up in front and her and Sam get out of it and run to meet me. My friends hugged me and asked me if I was okay. I said yes, but I was still in shock. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I was able to pull myself together enough to give my statement to the police. It turned out that Elvira was watching the live feed, and upon seeing that the guy was inside my house, she immediately called the police. I was so scared at the time when I started hearing that guy in my hallway that I completely forgot about the live feed, and it didn't even cross my mind to call the police. The man was obviously arrested and jailed, but it turned out that I was not his first victim. A while back, he had done the same thing with another girl, but unlike me, this young girl was sexually abused. And then the man uploaded the video to a social network with a fake account, which they could never trace. Upon learning this, I felt chills and felt like throwing up. I guess I was very lucky to have escaped unharmed from that situation. I will never be able to thank Elvira for calling the police. The truth is that I suck at long-distance driving. I want to make this clear at the outset because my lack of experience means that I rarely drive for more than half an hour at a time. But for work, I had to make a 10-hour drive from my small town to San Francisco, where our main office is located. I've been working remote for at least about 9 or 10 months now, so unfortunately this was my first time taking this road. It wasn't the famous California coastal highway, but a less traveled route on the opposite end of the state, crossing empty deserts and small towns. I had never been on this road before, so it was all new to me. I set the GPS and set off at 6 p.m., hoping to make it in time for hotel check-in, which was at 2 p.m. the next day. The first hour of the drive, I drove through my city, and gradually the buildings dwindled to just a couple of structures here and there, and eventually there was nothing left. There were hardly any other cars on the road for about 3 hours. I passed a gas station and realized I should check how much fuel I had, so I glanced at the gauge and saw that it was almost at reserve. In fact, it was dangerously low. Driving for so long on a boring, empty road made me distracted and not paying attention to it. I thought I could hold out until the next gas station, So for the next 20 minutes I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of a gas station. But as I drove on, every mile without a gas station filled me with trepidation and anxiety. I needed to find one soon or I would imminently be stranded in the middle of nowhere. The feeling of panic came over me for being such an idiot and letting my gas run out in the middle of a desert, and just at that moment, I started to notice the car jerking and shaking. So I realized that things were getting serious just when I thought the engine might die at any moment. But at that instant, I saw some headlights in the distance. It appeared to be a police car stopped on the side of the road, so I opted to pull over to the shoulder and park to get a little closer. I hoped they had a gas can or at least could help me. I got out of the car and walked toward the vehicle. It had a light next to the driver's side mirror and a light bar on the roof, so from the back it looked like a police car. But as I got closer, I began to doubt if it could really help me. When I finally got to the side, I saw that it was indeed a police car, but not one in service. It looked like an old model that someone had bought after removing all the police markings. I looked out the window, and although there was no one inside, it didn't look abandoned either. The interior was fairly clean, and there was a Walmart bag on the passenger seat that appeared to contain some groceries. This all seemed rather strange to me. What was this car doing parked on this road in the middle of nowhere, and where was the driver? I looked out and the desert was dark and desolate, with only a few lonely cacti around, but in an instant I realized that something was moving out there. The figure was quite far from the road, so I couldn't tell for sure what the hell it was doing, but there was definitely someone moving in that spot. At that point, a bad feeling started to creep up in my stomach, and something told me that I should get back in my car and try to call 911, or at least call for help on the road. But suddenly, the figure stopped and stood still, as if it had realized I was there and started looking at me. I froze for a few moments, having no idea what to do. Finally, the person started running towards the road, and that's when I saw that this was my cue to run back to my car. I was scared out of my mind, and from what I could see, the guy was running at full speed because just as I jumped into the driver's seat, he was already on the road, standing next to his vehicle, looking at me with a very disturbing intensity. With my headlights on, I could finally make out his face. He had long brown hair along with a rather unkempt beard. Sand and dirt covered his body, from his shoes to his face. I couldn't determine if he was angry or what, but he just stood there, still as a deer caught in the headlights of a car. I was so terrified that I couldn't start the engine. I felt that if I did and he heard the sound, I was going to be in trouble. So I stood there, trying to dial 911 over and over again, but with no luck. Finally, as I struggled to get the call through, the man got into his car and a minute later drove off without further ado, leaving the lights off as he disappeared down the road. 30 minutes later, an officer showed up and started pouring gas into my tank. I told him about the weird guy I had seen in the desert, but he mostly ignored me and didn't even deign to check, instead joking that he was probably burying a body and acted like it was nothing serious. I was so confused that I didn't insist anymore, just thanked him for the help and kept driving. That was 1 year ago, and the reason why I am writing this anecdote is because a few days ago in that same stretch of road, and right in the place where I had seen that guy, the body of a woman who had been missing for exactly 1 year was found. This woman was murdered by her husband, who had recently been arrested and ended up confessing to the crime and telling the officers where he had buried his wife's body. When I saw the news on TV, I didn't recognize the guy, as he was badly affected and with short hair. What I did recognize was the car from where he was taken and handcuffed. The guy had tried to run away from the police but was arrested when he was trying to leave the state. I am absolutely certain that this is the same man who had already died, and it gives me chills to know that almost certainly, and witnessed the moment when the man had just left his wife's body buried in the desert. My name is Sebastian, and just recently I separated from my wife Carla. One day out of the blue, she sat me down in our living room and blurted out that our relationship wasn't working. That it's not me, it's her. The typical "it's not you, it's me" that your partner says to you when she just stopped loving you or has someone else. I froze and tried to dig a little deeper, because there had to be a clear reason, but we just kept on the same topic. She said she just hadn't been happy for a long time, but something inside me told me that there was a part missing from that story, so I asked her if it had something to do with Javier, her attractive co-worker, since they had been together a lot lately, and I had always suspected that there was something strange between them. I guess I shouldn't have said anything because then all hell broke loose and she started yelling at me, accusing me that I was attacking her for no reason when she was just trying to be honest with me about her feelings. So as you can imagine, the conversation ended very badly. And in the end, I packed my things and left, thinking it was best to give her some time alone to reflect. After all, I loved Carla very much and didn't want to lose her. That night, I fell into the house of my brother Tomas. He offered me to stay with him for as long as I needed, but after a week he told me that I had to leave, that I was getting him down and that he needed to focus on his own marriage. I didn't have much money saved up or anywhere else to go, so I ended up checking into a seedy Rosemont motel that was not too far from where I lived, and it was the only affordable place I could stay for a while. It was on the darker side of town, surrounded by old warehouses, and the place was pretty run down. The only good thing was a small pool in the back, so every night after work, I would go in for a swim for a while to clear my mind and drain some of the stress and anguish of my situation. It was the only time I could relax and stop thinking about Carla. On my third day there, I met a woman at the pool. She was young and very attractive, with dark skin, reddish hair, and a spectacular figure, so she quickly caught my attention. She introduced herself as Anna and asked me how long I planned to stay. I replied that I wasn't sure. She seemed very friendly, so we soon began to talk. I told her that I had separated from my wife but still hoped we could reconcile. Anna seemed a little put off. Perhaps she didn't like the fact that I was still a married man. I asked her about her and she mentioned that she worked for her brother, but she didn't want to go into details apparently, as she only talked a little about her life but always came back to me and my situation with Carla. He must have seemed a bit of a pain in the ass, though in the end we hit it off and he invited me to have a drink in his room. At first I turned her away, but she insisted that there was nothing to be afraid of between us, that it would just be a friendly outing. So I agreed, and after I went upstairs to dry off and change into the cubbyhole I had for a room, I went to knock on her door in bedroom 21. She greeted me in a small, loose-fitting robe that left little to the imagination, and with an open bottle of wine in her hand. In an instant, I was about to turn around and leave, but she convinced me that nothing was going to happen between the two of us, that she just liked to be comfortable and the wine was simply to relax a bit and have a nice chat. I'm not a child, and I know how to read the signs of a woman who doesn't want to talk, but I thought that maybe I could spend some time with her and distract myself. But I was clear that I didn't want things to go beyond that. I still loved Carla, and technically, we were still husband and wife, so I wasn't comfortable with the idea of being unfaithful, no matter how attractive this girl was. We settled at her little table and started drinking. She kept encouraging me to drink more, as if she really wanted me to get drunk. I poured myself several glasses before I realized that she had barely touched her first drink. Then I started to get a strange hunch, but I guess the wine was already taking effect. Nevertheless, I kept going. We talked about everyday things, movies and music, although every now and then she would throw me a question about Carla. I don't know if it was the wine or what, but it ended up coming out that I had thought my wife might be dating her coworker, Javier. Her eyes lit up with interest at the mention of that, and she suddenly started bombarding me with more questions about him. Already a little drunk, I started to unburden myself to her. I really didn't know him that well, and despite my suspicions, I had never had any evidence against him. He always behaved well in front of me, but the rage for everything that had happened made me talk very badly about the guy. I blurted out that he was a cretin, lousy at his job, and that he looked disgusting. I even ripped into a comment about his bad breath. Anna just sat there listening with a blank stare. Then she calmly got up and walked over to her dressing table. "You shouldn't have said that," she warned me. I tried to ask her what she meant, but before I could finish, she spun around with a knife in her hand, pointing it straight at my face. At that moment, I jumped out of the chair and backed up, stumbling backwards onto the carpet as fear gripped me. "Javier's a good guy," he blurted out, "much better than a loser like you." What the hell? Even though Anna was shorter and thinner than me, she was in full fury that night, and in the blink of an eye she grabbed me with one hand, and with the other she plunged the knife into my shoulder. I screamed for help, but in a motel like this there was no way anyone would come to the rescue, so I knew I had to fend for myself. Anna was completely unhinged, out of it completely, and she jabbed the knife in further, making me feel intense pain, but that somehow gave me a little boost of energy, so I gave her a shove and she slammed into the wall, but before she could recover I let loose a kick in her side. The dresser was a foot away, along with that old TV hanging over it, so I grabbed him and dragged him over the edge. "Who the hell are you and what do you want from me?" I demanded. I made it clear that if he didn't answer, the TV would fall on him. The knife was still there, sticking out of my shoulder, but adrenaline and anger kept me from feeling the pain. "You had to have seen it coming," she said. "Why didn't you just stay quiet and keep drinking?" "Who are you?" I asked again. "I'm Javier's sister," she shouted from the floor. "I work for him." Well, life gives you surprises, as the song says. With that, the reason for her hysteria. "What does he pay you for?" I asked again. "I'm not telling you anything," he shouted back, or rather shrieked. I started pushing the TV, bringing it dangerously close to the edge of the dresser. If it fell, it would crush his head, since it was one of those old TVs that weighed like a ton. And this was one of the big ones. In view of the fact that he was really in danger, he finally decided to talk. He told me he just wanted me to get drunk and then take some compromising pictures. "That's all," he clarified. "But you had to open your mouth and I couldn't hold back." He spat at me. "Why the blackmail, you idiot?" I asked him. "To get you to agree to a divorce. Your wife won't be able to marry him until you sign the papers, and with hard evidence that you were unfaithful to him, you'll have no choice. It's nothing personal." The moment he blurted that out, all my fury evaporated. A numbing chill ran through me from head to toe, and without a word, I left the room. I went to my car and drove to the hospital to have the knife removed and the appropriate dressing done, but I couldn't even feel the pain. On the way, I called the police, and both Ana and Javier ended up behind bars. I have no idea what crimes they committed or what their sentence will be, and I am also unclear if Carla was aware of this whole plan, but I know I will find out at the trial. The only thing I know for sure is that I never want to see my wife again. My brother Jake moved to New York a few years ago. I always wanted to go visit him, but I never had enough money. It took me quite a while, but I finally managed to save enough to spend a week there. I was able to stay in his apartment, so I didn't have to spend on hotels. When I told him, you could tell he was super excited. Jake and I had always been close, even though I hadn't seen him in person since his move. On my first day, he took the day off work and took me to see the city. We went to all the tourist sites, took a walk through Central Park, and then ate at a restaurant he always mentioned with enthusiasm. Later, he took us to Times Square for dinner, and we walked around for a while just as the sun was setting. It was a super lively place and very interesting. Jake guided me through some of the more popular stores, and eventually we came to a restaurant that he was very excited to take me to. He told me that he and his ex-girlfriend had gone there several times, but only on special occasions. He didn't tell me what they were celebrating, but assured me I was going to love it. We ended up at a fancy French restaurant near the metro station. Truth be told, it looked like a place out of my budget, but Jake told me he would pay. "Order whatever you want," he told me. "There are no prices on the menu." So I simply chose what looked best. My brother and I ordered dinner and had a great time, eating and chatting as if nothing had changed, feeling like we were more connected than ever. The food was delicious, even though it was probably the most expensive food I had ever tasted in my life. When we finished, Jake got up and said he was going to the bathroom. He assured me he would be back quickly, but he never returned. I waited at the table for quite a while, and then the waiter came over to ask if I was ready to pay. I tried to explain that my brother was covering the bill, but he had stayed in the bathroom longer than I expected. I asked the waiter if I could wait a moment while he went to get Jake, but I could tell he didn't trust me. I guess in a place as expensive as this, they must deal with a lot of customers trying to get away without paying, so he followed me around the restaurant while I went to see what was going on with Jake. After walking down several aisles, I finally got to the restrooms and looked inside, but Jake wasn't there. The waiter was right behind me, arms crossed, and he didn't look happy at all. I think he already took it for granted that I was trying to sneak in, so to trick him, I pulled out my cell phone and tried to call my brother, but he didn't answer. I was ready to try again when Jake texted me, "Sorry, I had to go out. Next time it's on me." I couldn't believe it. My own brother had bailed on me. He knew I didn't have the money for something like that and just ran off, leaving me to pay the bill. I was on fire with rage when the waiter called his boss. Both guys loomed over me, staring at me with an intensity that made me too uncomfortable. I was dead embarrassed, and in the end, they had to take out my wallet and asked for my credit card. I won't tell you how much the meal cost me, but most of the money I had put together for this trip was already gone. I left that restaurant in a hurry and took the subway and headed straight to Jake's apartment. I'm sure he was waiting for me. I thought maybe he was laughing at the cruel joke he had played on me. Even if he gave me back the money, I was so angry and embarrassed that I sent him another message while I was on the subway. But I didn't hear anything from him. When I got to his apartment, luckily I had a spare key so I could get in, but he wasn't there. I decided not to call him again. He would eventually come back, and when he did, I would remind him of how well we got along as kids. Jake had never treated me badly like he did that night. The city must have really changed him. I plopped down on the couch and tried to watch something on TV, but I was so furious I couldn't concentrate. After a while, I finally got another message from him. He asked me if I was upset with him, but I didn't respond, and then he texted me again asking where I was. I replied that I was back at his apartment and that I was thinking of changing my flight to leave in the morning. He didn't answer me for a couple of minutes and then wrote, "I don't believe you. I'm at my apartment and you're not here." It was kind of weird that he said that. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me again. To check where I was, I sent him my location and left the phone on the table. He sent me another message, but I didn't read it. Half an hour later, I heard Jake trying to open the door. I got up ready to face him, but when it opened, it wasn't him. It was a guy I'd never seen before. He had a gun next to him and demanded that I leave immediately. Normally, I would have done as he told me, but I had never found myself in such a dangerous situation. Besides, I was still so angry about everything that had happened that night that I wasn't going to let him walk all over me anymore. I put my foot down and told him no. I wasn't going to move. He raised the gun and pointed it directly at my face. "I don't want to shoot you," he said. "Okay, I'll go," I replied, but he clicked the safety on and started to move closer. I backed up until my back hit the wall, and at that moment I regretted facing this guy because whoever he was, he looked dangerous. "Okay," I said, "I'm leaving." But it was too late. He laughed, and right behind me was the window. I reached back and pushed it out, thinking I could climb out that way if things got bad. But looking over my shoulder, I saw that there was no fire escape, just empty air and a 10-story drop. I was trapped. In view of my situation, I held up both hands and told him I was leaving. I tried to walk past him, but he kept pointing the gun in my face. "Don't move," he said. "You're just as senseless as that asshole. You deserve each other." As soon as he said that, I realized who it was. It was Jake's ex-boyfriend, Roman. I had never met him in person, but I had seen pictures of him. I knew their breakup had been anything but easy, and now he was here, threatening me with a gun. "Please," I said. "Jake isn't here. He dropped me off in Times Square." She told me she had seen him take me to his favorite restaurant, a place she had gone with him on their first date. He felt so betrayed by that he confronted him in the bathroom, and things got heated. But Jake escaped out the window. Now it all made sense. He didn't want to leave me, he just had to run away. Clearly, he hadn't sent me those messages. It was Roman, who must have taken his phone during their fight. "Thanks to you," he continued. "Now I know where he lives, and when I get back, he'll be mine. I just have to get you out of the way." Did he think I was his new partner? I tried to explain that I was his brother and that I was visiting, but he didn't believe me. He moved closer, pointing the gun a few inches from my face, and I didn't want to die that way. I had to act fast, so I blurted out the only thing that would make him mad. "He never loved you." He let out a grunt, and I ducked just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet shot out the window as I had my head down. I ran forward and knocked Roman down. The gun flew out of his hands and we began to struggle. In the midst of the struggle, I tried to wrestle him to the ground, but I didn't expect him to stumble and rush out the window. One second he was there with us, and the next he was gone. I looked out the window and saw him lying on the ground, dead, far below. Wasting no time, I called the police, and before they arrived, I heard Jake rush in. He hugged me and apologized 1,000 times. He wanted to explain to me what had happened to him, but I already knew. I told him to look out the window to see what was left of his deranged ex. When the police arrived, I had to tell them the whole story. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but I guess Jake had already filed a restraining order against Roman, which gave our story strength. After their call, the officers left, and Jake eventually apologized for what was the most horrible night of our lives. Without his phone, he had no way to warn me about his ex, but he was glad I was able to defend myself. After that, Jake and I enjoyed an amazing vacation together, despite everything that happened that first night. Honestly, I'm glad I went to see him.